I found that HSPs, we call them highly sensitive people, that the ones that have been actually practicing tools, they're quite resilient, because being a sensitive person means that you're experiencing the world differently than up to 80% of the population. And the world is more set up for the stimulation levels of people who don't have this trait of sensitivity.
Welcome to yourbrilliance.com. I'm your host, Amy Waterman. When life is chaotic, some people thrive. They sail through stress, they take everything in stride, and they don't break a sweat. Other people go into survival mode. They get hit by so much stuff that they're completely overwhelmed. It's like the ground they used to stand on is gone. And if you're highly sensitive, it can be even worse. You feel everything. You feel the anxiety, the uncertainty, the tension, and the fear. The chaos around you feels like chaos inside of you. How can you get your feet back under you when that chaos shows no sign of stopping? This week's guest helps sensitive people find balance, resilience, and strength even in the midst of crisis. Julie Bjelland is a sensitivity expert, psychotherapist, author, and founder of the online community Sensitive Empowerment. Her work is regularly featured on national media, and she's on a mission to empower sensitive people to live their best lives. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me. And it's such an important topic you're sharing with your audience.
Well, you've been helping highly sensitive people now through the coronavirus pandemic, and I think it's affected all of us. How do you think that highly sensitive people go through crises like these differently?
Well, I think that it depends on how much they have been using, like developing tools or getting support. And it also depends on how sensitive they are. There's a scale of sensitivity. And I found that HSPs, we call them highly sensitive people, that the ones that have been actually practicing tools, they're quite resilient, because being a sensitive person means that you're experiencing the world differently than up to 80% of the population. And the world is more set up for the stimulation levels of people who don't have this trait of sensitivity. So I'd say it depends a lot on how much you've actually been developing tools and using tools, because if you've been using tools, you're quite resilient as a sensitive person. But if I hadn't have had the tools that I have developed over these years, I think this would be a really difficult time to balance, the crisis that's happening with the high levels of sensitivity that I experience.
So for our audience who may not be familiar with the term, when we talk about sensitivity, we're not just talking about, oh, that person's sensitive because, they cry all the time or whatever. This is actually a psychological trait, and it's got some very clear definition to it. Would you share a little bit more about what sensitivity means in your line of work?
Yes, so about 20% of the population has this scientifically proven trait called sensory processing sensitivity. It's more widely known as the highly sensitive person, or HSP. About 70% of the population of HSPs are introverts, and about 30% are extroverts. It's equal in gender. And it was really it evolved as a survival strategy of the population, because this group of people has extra information. We have a depth of processing. We're able to read body language and micro expressions that 80% of the population miss. We have a very different experience in the world, even differences in our brain, which have both challenges and positives. And it's a fascinating thing to learn about. And there's a lot of research around it already.
So if somebody around you was highly sensitive, would you know it? Like, is there a way of kind of being able to spot sensitive people just from the outside?
Well, I always say that it's the sensitive person that is the first person to jump up and help people. If you know somebody that is less like super kind and caring and compassionate and empathetic, and they're intuitive and they feel things deeply, that's likely a sensitive person. I actually have a sensitivity quiz on my website, so people can actually take a quiz and find out their score. I happen to be way up high on the highest part of that scale. So my experience in the world is impacted by that. And it certainly used to be incredibly challenged by this trait because I felt so sensitive. But once I learned how to train my brain and learn some of the tools that I teach, it's just a night and day experience to be able to access those gifts, lift off that layer of overwhelm, and access those gifts that come with this trait that you're so needed.
So one of the things I was thinking of is not only is sensitivity about just getting overwhelmed with a lot of stuff, but as you were saying, it's also about being empathetic and compassionate. And right now with the world the way it is, when you read the news and you look at all the stuff that's happening, that can really get inside you and make you feel not just, even maybe your life's okay, but you can absorb the suffering of the world. And that's a pretty hard way to go.
Yes, you absolutely do absorb it. Like energetically, you absorb things. I mean, it can be a positive to absorb things if it's like you're feeling somebody's love and positivity. But if you're diving down into watching hours of news, and as a sensitive person, that's something I definitely don't recommend doing that. Instead, I say read headlines. You can learn what's going on in the world without absorbing it so much. And you actually have to learn how to separate that energy from, like, your energy from somebody else's energy, or else you sort of are this open sponge. I used to say that I felt like I walked around in the world as an open wound. I just absorbed all the sadness and pain, and it was a really difficult way to live. It contributed to anxiety and depression, and I know that there's a lot of sensitive people that experience that. But one of the things that excites me about this trait is that we actually have research that shows, for example, if children are raised, like sensitive children who have this trait are raised by parents who support them in their sensitivity, they're less likely to experience anxiety and depression, even less than a child without this trait. The flip side of that is if they are not given the right types of support, like a lot of us weren't, because our parents didn't even know about the trait back then, that we're more likely to experience anxiety and depression because we experience the world differently. And a lot of people in our culture, when we say, you're sensitive, it's not considered a positive when you hear that. I'm on a mission to change that. I want that to be changed because I believe sensitivity is absolutely needed in the world. It's just that we have to learn how to manage a sensitive nervous system. It really comes down to that, being able to manage a sensitive nervous system to find that balance.
It is really hard to deal with the social stigma around sensitivity. And I know you said that it's equally represented among both genders, but I think in particular for boys who are sensitive, because we really are shamed for, with children who cry at the drop of a hat. They're told to toughen up, that it's not that bad. Or, my favorite thing is, just calm down. Like you can somehow shut off your feelings and your emotions. And so sometimes we can then end up feeling like we are not somebody that anybody should emulate because, our role models are those people who are cool and calm and collected under stress. And that's not us. And we can end up feeling really ashamed of it. Are there some ways that you help highly sensitive people learn to accept their trait and not feel like it's a weakness?
Yes, it's so important to really learn about it, like deeply understand the trait, understand the brain differences, understand the nervous system differences, and spend time with other highly sensitive people. This is so important. When you spend time with other highly sensitive people, it changes your perspective because you start to normalize and validate your experience. You're like, wow, you experience things like that too? And what you were saying about getting those messages, I certainly heard that a lot. Like, why are you so sensitive? What's wrong with you? Then we start getting to the message that there's something wrong with how we experience the world. What if instead we could teach each other and our children to accept natural emotions that we experience and to support ourselves through those emotions instead of telling us that they're wrong? That would change everything. And that's something I see that a lot of new parents are doing that. And I always get really excited about that because I just know that those children are going to be raised in such a different experience. I think about that with my own children, and they're both highly sensitive. They're teenagers now. And I think about like, wow, they got the support they needed and they are so emotionally healthy, so much more than I was as a teenager. And so it's so doable too. And you could train yourself now. If you're an adult and you haven't had tools and you haven't had the right support, I usually recommend 3 things. It's like, get to know the trait, really understand it. I have a ton of information on my website. spend time with other highly sensitive people. That's why I created my sensitive empowerment community, so that we could be together, and it's so powerful, and start to learn tools like brain training. And I'm kind of sort of known for the brain training tools that I teach, because it excites me to know that when you can actually activate calming centers intentionally in the brain that deactivate stress centers because they can't be activated at the same time. And you can train your brain through certain breath techniques to let your brain know, I'm okay. I don't need you to send out these alarm bells just because somebody criticized me or something stressful is happening. My life is not in danger in this moment, so I don't need you to send out all those signals. So you're basically telling your brain that, and you can communicate with your brain in those ways. And that's something that excites me. It really helped me, and it helps my students and clients so much over the years. So it's wonderful to know that those tools are available.
So of course, now we want to know, could you share with us some of the tools that you teach highly sensitive people to manage and cope with stressful times?
Yes, one of my favorite ones is accessible to everybody. You can teach children, teens. This is great for everyone. It's a breath technique. So basically what happens in the brain, I'll kind of explain a little bit first before I get into the technique. So if you think about the brain as having two parts, the emotional brain and the cognitive brain. For most people who have this trait, we tend to have more activation in the fight, flight, freeze system part of the brain, something I used to have often. If you notice you get really nervous or scared about something and your heart starts racing, that means that your brain has sent a signal to release adrenaline. It even sent a signal to change how the oxygen is used in your body. It sends it to your muscles, which is why we get tight. And what we want to do is tell the brain, wait a minute, I'm not about to die. A lion is not about to attack me. I don't want all these signals to be sent. So we can do a breath. So you take in the count of 4. You breathe in for the count of 4. Hold it for 2. Exhale for 7. So it's a really long, slow exhale. Do that for about 5 to 7 cycles. That will reduce the heart rate. And what happens is, because you don't breathe that way if your life is in danger, you do short, shallow breaths because the oxygen is being used to run or fight. So that's why it goes into your muscles. So when you do that long, slow exhale, you're actually telling the brain, it's okay. You don't have to send out the alarm bells. And then your system starts to get back on track, and your body stops releasing that adrenaline and all those stress signals. So that's a really fantastic one. It helps a lot of HSPs right away.
Yes, that is so good, because one of the things that it's so true is that when we get flooded and when we get overwhelmed, it seems like we stop and we're not able to be our best selves. We're sometimes not able to think rationally. It's all too much. And one of the things that I think we do before we know tools like that is we try to create some sort of wall between us and the rest of the world. So and we can do that sometimes with unhealthy habits. Watching TV can shut off our brain. Staying home and not going out can just shut everything out. And I wondered if there's any, aside from the breathing technique, are there any healthy ways that we can temporarily just shut off that acute sensitivity so that we can just function and then maybe come back to being sensitive later on?
You know, that's a great question that you're asking. And it's important to understand how the sensitive person experiences their nervous system. So if you think of the nervous system as like being a container, and a sensitive person has, hundreds of cups of stuff getting dumped into that container, into that nervous system container from sensory overload, a lot of it, because it's a sensory processing sensitivity. So if you're always in, there's always noise, there's always something going on, there's a lot of stimulation externally, then that nervous system container gets too full, too much stuff going in it and not enough draining out. So we want to look at what's going in it, and also what can we do to drain out. So slowing down, like for me, I recommend a couple of hours a day of quiet time to yourself if possible, and 1 full day off a week to be able to meditate, to center, do centering practices, things that really slow that nervous system motor down. Because if you have 2 people experiencing something like crisis or stress happening in the world, or even just in your daily life, and your nervous system container just has a little bit little bit full, and the other person has it totally full, those two people are going to experience that stress in a very different way, because the person who starts overflowing, that's when that overwhelm happens, and we lose access to that cognitive brain that has tools, and we lose focus, and we lose efficiency, and you lose facts even. That's why sometimes if you're in an argument with someone, you just completely, like, you don't even know what you're talking about anymore, and you can't take in new information. So if your partner's activated and you're trying to tell them something, they literally cannot take in new information, and you lose creativity, all that kind of stuff. But when you get that cognitive brain turned back on, you actually, one of the first things that comes back is creativity, and you get focus, and you get efficiency, and you get your facts back, and you get the logic back, because the emotional brain is pretty irrational. That's why we all have experiences where after an argument or something, you're like, oh, wow, I see things very differently now that I calmed down. And to be able to turn that cognitive brain back on as you need it to support you is so helpful. So I really recommend that quiet time, a lot of time in nature. That is something that it seems to help everyone. Like, I've never heard an HSP come and say to me, I took that nature walk and it didn't do anything. I've never heard that, ever. So out of thousands of people I've worked with, people always say, you know what, that made me feel better. And so doing more of that, nature time, quiet time, yoga, activities that are quiet and soothing to the nervous system is really supportive to you.
And you have an online course that can help guide people through these tools. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, my course is called Brain Training for the Highly Sensitive Person, Techniques to Reduce Anxiety and Overwhelming Emotions. It's an 8-week program. I walk you through the techniques, learning how to move from reaction into pause, reflect, and response, which is a huge difference to walk around in the world, because you're able to turn that cognitive brain back on. You're able to regulate your nervous system. A lot of HSPs tell me by week 2, they're already starting to feel those positive shifts. It excites me because it started out with, I wanted to learn these tools. And then as a psychotherapist, I was using these tools with my clients, and it was really successful. And then I started teaching online courses, and I'm like, these tools work for everyone. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it works. And that's what's really exciting to me, because what happens is you lift off that layer of overwhelm, and then you access those gifts, and those gifts come out and make the world a better place, because that's what sensitive people do. Your kindness and your caring about the world, you're out there doing things to make it a better place if you've lifted off that layer of overwhelm. And that's what's the key part, so that you can access those gifts.
So I would like to know then, compared to how you used to be before you learned and started practicing these tools, and how it feels to be inside your brain now, what is that transformation like? What's the difference now when you look back and you see how far you've come?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, because it's so fascinating to me where I was and where I am now. And before, anxiety and depression was taking over my life, I would think like the first thing I wanted to do was, how soon can I get to my room, close the door, and shut out the world? And that was a terrible way to live. I had a mask on. I wasn't able to be myself in the world. It was a very unhappy time and very difficult every day. I call that survival mode. And now with the right tools, I call it empowerment. And that is like, I get to live the life that I want. I've created the life I want. I do work that I love that helps people in the world. I'm in an incredibly healthy relationship now. My children are doing great. I mean, there are so many changes that happen. And that's why I get excited about HSPs having this information, because I know the same thing's going to happen to you. You're going to be a better parent. You're going to be able to do things in the world that help others, because that's just what you do anyway. But if you can access those gifts, you're going to do it even more. And that's what's needed. We need sensitive people to sort of rise up in empowerment and change the world. Like, we need you to be doing that.
And for those of you out there watching, if you are struggling with overwhelm and anxiety right now, then Julie's course might just give you that ground you need beneath your feet. And right now, she is offering it for 80% off to our audience with the code HSP. And to learn more and to sign up, all you've got to do is go to yourbrilliance.org/sensitive. That's yourbrilliance.org/sensitive. Thank you so much, Julie, for coming onto the show. And I wondered if you had any last message you would like to leave our viewers with.
Well, thank you for having me and for bringing this information to your audience. And I want sensitive people to know how so valuable you are. I didn't used to know that about myself, and I know a lot of you out there don't know that yet. But I tell you, when you really reduce those challenges and you access those gifts, you're going to see how needed you are in the world to be your best self, to live authentically as yourself, to connect to the world, to help the world. And most of all, I really want you to understand how valuable and needed you are.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you out there for watching. Now, did you have any aha moments or insights while watching this interview? If so, share them with us in the comments. For more interviews like these, subscribe to Your Brilliance TV here on YouTube, and then come on over to yourbrilliance.com for more tips and insights on how you can live your most brilliant life. See you next time.